Well, I enjoyed Dr. Kastrup's presentation very much. Its only failings are the failings you would expect of somebody with his background, because people who work with computers have never seen what goes on inside living cells, or the way in which they work or adapt or talk to each other or communicate, and much more to the point, how they adapt the way they do it in the light of unforeseen circumstances. I have in the past shown at this very conference how a damaged algal cell can be repaired by the two cells alongside. Nobody ever realized that this happened, and certainly nobody ever has the slightest knowledge of how it can happen. How a cell which has never experienced anything before, after all, we were talking about a chain of rhodophyte cells growing one next to the other, like the carriages in the train, and one is cut in half with a needle, so the content is now lost. And yet the two cells next door managed to rebuild it and reconstruct it. And the point is that that must be an unforeseeable circumstance, since the only place in the world in which a cell can be broken and still remain with the two parts close to each other is on a microscopist's slide in a laboratory. It can't happen in nature. If the cell has been snapped by being stepped on by a dinosaur, or dropped on by a stone, or swept away by a flood of water, the two broken ends will be meters, perhaps kilometers apart. The only place in the world where they can remain close is on that microscopist's slide. So this is something which never in evolutionary terms any of these things have ever seen before. Yet these simple, and I use air quotes as I said, these simple algal cells are able to work out how to repair and rebuild and reconstitute to full life their next door neighbor. I mean, it is utterly inconceivable. The problem is, of course, that we're trying to conceive of humanity with humanity. And if you're going to understand something like the human brain, then you need to be something much greater than the human brain to understand it. And it isn't just a question of data or data processing. It isn't just a matter of digital automation. It's a matter of living, organic, natural intelligence. And I just wish people would stop trying to equate material constructions with the notion of living, intelligent organisms. It's always been a curious aspect of humanity. When people discovered nylon, they didn't celebrate nylon as an extensible tensile thread with extraordinary mechanical properties. It was called artificial silk. It's nothing like artificial silk. It was chemically different, physically different, it behaved in a different way. When laminated fiberboard was invented, they called it artificial wood. So it wasn't artificial wood, it was laminated. It had none of the characteristics of artificial wood. And as soon as they discovered that they could make computers back in the 60s, they were always called an artificial brain. It isn't an artificial brain, it's a real computer. It's not an artificial anything. And the whole functioning of organic systems is so entirely unrelated to anything that we have ever dreamt of in the digital world. The notion of a singularity is utterly bizarre. A singularity is only ever going to work if, in some way, you could create, and nobody could create it. The only thing that can create it is the living cell itself, a living being like another living being. There's no singularity. It's not as though computers are trying to approach us any more than scissors are trying to become human. Scissors can do things we can't, and computers can do things we can't. It's totally and utterly different. And the greatest mistake people make is wondering when they're going to approach us, wondering whether they will get better than us, wondering when they will get faster than us. That's like wondering when an aeroplane is going to be the same as a baby. They are not the same thing. And it is bizarre, irresponsible, and I may say ignorant, ever to think they might.
I'd like to thank Professor Ford for that very interesting, commentary. Actually, I read a news, some time back in Times of India, that they said that they make a dead frog, which was some thousands of years back, disappeared, so that frog, they make it alive. And I was very much interested to see what has happened. And I opened that news, when I found out, what they found out is that they found a frog which they think that now does not exist. They taken from that fossil the DNA, and they inserted that DNA into the present existing frogs, that nucleus. And they thought that, oh, we revived that frog again. They, so this type of ideas, synthetic life, artificial intelligence, and all this, stuff like in artificial wood that you have given the example, they are using those terms to, what you can say, confuse or misguide the society, and especially the film industries, making up so many films on this, computers, that computers
They're very
doing this
lovable,
and doing
those dear
that.
people.
So
I adore these gullible people. They happen all the time. Time and time again, people say they found that the trace of fossilized DNA. Well, hang on. If it is fossilized DNA, then by definition, it is not DNA. Since a fossil is now a mineral substitution process. DNA depends not just upon its alleles and the way they relate to each other, but the way that the electrons are moving around the system. It's a sort of a fluid, dynamic, vital system of movement. The moment that it is fossilized, then it's finished. You can, of course, freeze things and hold them in suspended animation. You can even dry things. The tardigrade, which has become quite well known in recent years, a little microscopic multicellular organism about half a millimeter long. There are tardigrades on the moon. I bet you never knew that. A few years ago, the Israelis sent a space probe to the moon with tardigrades to see if they would survive the journey. But it misfired and it crashed and burst open on the lunar surface, scattering the little tardigrades. And I don't doubt that one day some spaceman will go and pick them up, or a spacewoman, possibly even by then a space child, and will pick them up, bring them back, drop them in some distilled water, and watch them come back to life. But there are, at this moment, tardigrades on the moon. And tardigrades can resist high levels of radiation. They can resist boiling. They can resist all sorts of circumstances that would normally exterminate life. But they still come back to life. But life is what they come back to, and life is inimitable.
Yes. And also when we heard that somewhere in the Kuwait, or I don't remember which country, that given citizenship to a robot. You heard that news came up. So they given a citizenship to a robot. So they're trying to create some kind of image, or some kind of misunderstanding in the community and society, so that people try to believe that robot is like almost like similar to living entity. Yes. So
there's an
the
entire
question
industry. There's an entire industry. I mean, I mentioned my book, Non-Science Returns. 50 years ago, when the original book came out, I warned that people were going to become opportunistic in science. Now science has become a business. And people exaggerate and wantonly exaggerate their research, even misstate their findings, knowing that the public won't ever realize, that the grant giving committee won't understand, and they'll get millions more to do it. I mean, I've done, as I'm sure some of you know, a lot of research on the early microscopes, on the microscopes at Leeuwenhoek in the 1600s, and painstakingly recreated how they were used and showed what you could see. Well, some dude in the Netherlands has just applied for a grant to do exactly that. He's going to basically reprise the research I did 40 years ago, and his grant is for $500,000, just to repeat somebody else's work. But of course, the people who gave him the money don't understand it. It's all full of long scientific words, and they think, well, it might get us some publicity, so let's give him the money. But it would be very interesting. I don't know what Dr. Kastrup thinks of this. It'd be quite interesting to try and imagine the proportion of what purports to be scientific research at the moment that is genuine scientific research. Most of it is what I call non-science or nonsense. It is research aimed not to try and nudge new knowledge from a recalcitrant universe. It is aimed at boosting your bank balance, increasing your fame, and giving you the chance to travel the world, whilst meanwhile blinding people with long words so they don't understand what you're doing and give you next year's grant. Now, I'd love to know what proportion of science going on is what I call real science, and how much of it is just basically, to be crude, conning money out of authorities.
I think, if I may, I think it's a tragically small proportion. We can mention concrete examples of this. The latest estimate is that 60% of papers in psychology cannot be replicated. There is a vast and overwhelming abuse of the p-value threshold for statistical significance. It's called p-value engineering. This is all over the place. The most preposterous, implausible hypotheses are defended when researchers collect enough statistics and apply enough filtering criteria to the data that they can get a p-value below 5 and they can claim, well, this is statistically significant. A very prominent one that is based on enormous grants is psychedelic neuroimaging, and there is a hypothesis put forward called the anthropic brain hypothesis. And what I'm going to say now is literally what the hypothesis is. The hypothesis is that although brain activity only reduces while you are having a psychedelic trip, you know, you're having the most rich experience of your life, the most intense, but your brain is effectively going to sleep. So they started trying to find something that does increase in the brain to account for the psychedelic experience. And what they found was that brain noise, which they call entropy, sort of misrepresenting information theory, that's not the equation between entropy and noise that was done in the beginnings of information theory, but never mind that. Brain noise increases by 0.005 in a scale from 0 to 100. And it is a negligible increase in a negligible variable, noise. Psychedelic experience is not noisy, it's highly structured, but it crossed the p-value, the threshold. So it's put forward with great fanfare as a tremendous scientific advance. And it's utter nonsense. If I may use the word, it's BS, it's complete BS. And there is more. In recent years, I don't know how many research groups have claimed to have found where memories are encoded in the brain. And, you know, grandiose press releases put out by universities, we have discovered the secret, we have found memories. And then you read some of these papers and they have absolutely nothing to do with memory storage. Like one that I remember is they discovered that if you watch a certain video, there are certain patterns of brain activity. But if you then are not watching the video and you remember the video, then they can measure the same pattern of brain activity, the same neurons sort of get activated. Oh, they discovered where memory is stored. Nonsense. Memory is how does your brain know to have the same pattern of neuronal activations when you are just remembering? Not that it has the same patterns of activation. That is old news. If the experience we call memory is similar to the experience of the original watching the video, of course the patterns of activations will be the same. The question is, how does your brain know how to activate it in the same way? And that was published to great fanfare as the answer to the ultimate question of where memories are stored, while it says precisely nothing. Even researchers misportray their research, give interviews to the media saying the opposite of what the paper actually says. I have published critiques of this. So I agree with you. The moment we started, one, treating science as a profession like any other, and then putting all kinds of performance criteria and threatening professors and scientists with job termination if they don't meet those criteria, like a certain number of papers published. The moment we did that, we corrupted science. Scientists have to have tenure, unquestioned, untouched, unthreatened academic freedom. and they cannot be asked to meet yearly performance criteria that are measurable in a quantitative sense, because the great discoveries do not happen in this slow accumulation of scientific publications. Einstein had no publications when his 1905 paper came out. He was a clerk in the patent office. We forgot the Greek tradition of scholarship. We even forgot the medieval tradition of patronizing scholars. And I don't use the word patronizing in the modern sense, but in the sense of being a patron of an artist or a science during the Renaissance. So I think it's tragic what's happening.
You mentioned the proportion, 60% of papers that cannot be replicated in psychology. There's a just published survey on research in cancer, which you think would be as objective as you could get, as well as being well-funded. And 54% of findings in cancer research cannot be replicated. Now, not only that, but then you have plagiarism. And of course, particularly in Asia, plagiarism is overwhelmingly common. Interesting, India is the only country in the world where the academic authorities actually take action against plagiarists. If plagiarism is detected, then the supervisor in the department is censured. And if there's too much plagiarism, they lose their job. There's no other country in the world where they do that. In fact, most of Chinese research, 70 or 80%, they think, has been plagiarized from someone else. So it's become actually a business. That's what science has become, a business. And I rather wish I'd spoken to you before I wrote my book. Although I have to say that Nonsense Returns is the Bible for our modern era. And much of what you said, and I say this sincerely, Bernardo, much of what you said almost sounded like quotes from chapter 5. So the two of us clearly, although we're in different fields, have very similar conclusions. And I think anybody who is bright enough and intelligent enough just to look at the world of science around them is bound to draw similar conclusions. But never tell the public that we said so, or their grants might go away. And what would happen then?
I came across your work
I have something to say about the memory that Bernardo was saying. The memory, the way it is, working in the programmed, machine, we can precisely locate where the memory is. But when we talk about memory of a organism or a human being, we don't have a precise location where we can find and edit it or delete that precise memory. So that aspect is many researchers they highlighted that aspect actually. So we can see a clear distinction here also, like you got a particular portion of the screen that recording in the tape to remove a particular time stamp of that portion, but we cannot do that in the living organism, such editing.
I doubt whether there is a specific place where memory resides. Although we always think that the brain is the active part of the body, the brain is where all the action is centered, but every cell in the body is acquiring and processing stimuli. The notion of living without a brain, I did put a link up to one of my papers. Yes, the human body can exist without a brain, and the human brain can exist without a body. The brain is a very useful component within our bodies. And the reason we have a brain, the reason that plants don't, is because, of course, plants don't move about, whereas humans do. And the real reason we have brains is to find a mate, to find a partner, to find food, and to find drink. That's basically the only reason that any of us ever had a brain. We have movement to control, and therefore you need a brain to regulate it. But every part of our body is sensate. Every part of our body has its own form of cognition, and every part of our body is communicating with the rest of us, a view which is very close to the ancient Vedic treaties in India. When a pregnant woman suddenly says, I need marmalade and Vegemite or something, that's only because her cells have said to her, you're a little low on B vitamins, dear, you need to go and get some stuff. Brain hasn't done that. And of course, the brain has very little to do with most of what it is that we do. If you cut yourself and the cut will heal, well, that's not under the control of the brain or the central nervous system or hormones or anything else. The cells in your cut finger speak to themselves and say, oh dear, there's a cut. And they work out amongst themselves who is going to recreate the capillary plumbing, who is going to regenerate the stratum spinosum that brings the skin together, who is going to form the epithelium. And in fact, I had a very bad cut on my thumb. I cut it on a hedge trimmer, so it was actually slashed in the summer. And I simply put a plaster over it and took the plaster off 6 weeks later, and you'd hardly know there's anything wrong. And anybody who looked at it would say, wow, you must have had a clever doctor. No, I had clever cells. And that is what people fail all the time to realize. That's what we've got to get to grips with. And that's what nobody seems interested in. Well, I am, and that's a start.
It doesn't make as powerful a headline as the headline that we have found exactly where in the brain memories are located, like having found a little computer file in an SD card socket somewhere inside your brain. This makes headlines. It plays into Netflix's theme in Broken Mirror, or that sci-fi, nonsensical sci-fi series that promotes artificial consciousness. And in the world of social media and competitiveness, it's about how many clicks you get. So principles are relegated to last priority in this. But on the story of memories, wasn't it Pilbrand's research decades ago that showed that you have to slice away about 90% of a rat's brain before the rat cannot remember how to navigate a certain maze? And even then, you cannot say that it's memory that's gone, because if you slice 90% of the rat's brain, well, probably some other cognitive functions and motor functions are gone as well. So the rat cannot walk the maze. Or recent research done in planaria, people taught planaria how to navigate a simple water maze to get to food. And the planaria would remember how to navigate that maze. And planaria are the only animals, I think, that you can slice off their entire brain. It's a very simple brain, a few hundred neurons. You can slice off their brains and they grow a new head with a new brain. And lo and behold, after you've done that, you eliminated the brain and they grew a new head, a new brain, they still remembered how to navigate the water maze to get to food. Or things that are considered too dangerous to touch by mainstream academia, but mainstream researchers come across it every day. I have a good friend, Neil Teese, the discoverer of the interstitium, the largest body, the largest organ in the human body, which was discovered, I don't know, 5 years ago, maybe less. You probably read about it. Well, Neil is probably going to win the Nobel Prize in Medicine at some point. Knock on wood, I don't want to jinx him, but he is a liver pathologist. So he deals with transplant patients all the time. And he says, look, I don't know how this is possible, but the anecdotal evidence, his word for, well, there hasn't been a controlled study, but I see these patients all the time, every day for years. People's memories and tastes and dispositions seem to change when they get a new liver, and those changes are consistent with the donor. So there are many mysteries out there. Professor Ford, I am more aligned with your way of thinking than I let out. I mean, my first contact with your work was a short essay you wrote either for Scientific American or the New Scientist in 2010. The Power of the Single Cell, I think, was the name of.
Yes, New Scientist, that one was.
Yeah, and you talked about an amoeba capable of building a little shell for itself using mud particles. I was just flabbergasted by that. And I am more aligned with you about the intuition that there is a natural intuitive intelligence built into life. It may not have the ability to introspect or to think conceptually or to think symbolically like we do, but it's tremendously intelligent nonetheless. It's a spontaneous, natural intelligence. I'm aligned with you there. The only thing is I live in an environment where I cannot say anything that I cannot explicitly and unambiguously substantiate, at least in principle. And I do not have a way to do that when it comes to natural, spontaneous intelligence of all life, even single-celled organisms. It becomes an empirical question. I'm not versed enough with it to defend it that way. So I stick with the in principle questions, like, is it in principle possible that there is a technological singularity? well, I cannot categorically refute that in any explicit, unambiguous way. So I remain open to that. But if you ask me, if a gun is put to my head and I have to tell what I really think, otherwise they will shoot me dead, then I think you are right. But don't tell anyone.
The same comment again.
And
Yes,
I think
need to keep ultra new. I will send you a link or two
can
to
give
some of my presentations on that
time
subject.
to
Very much appreciated.
the
No,
audience.
pleasure.
I would like to ask something. Yes.
So I think Chandar Khanna, he was.
Thank you. Thank you. I was just going to ask a very simple, not ask. I was just going to make a very simple comment. Thank you kindly and deep gratitude for this very stimulating, exceptionally stimulating 5 hours that I've been attending. I'm the only person on this panel who's not a scholar. But having said that, I have changed dramatically my perception. I used to have an angst against artificial intelligence, but now I'm much more tolerant, much more tolerant. The hubris of the, as Professor Ford said, of the young algorithm proponents of, it's their hubris is, let it be, let's indulge them. As Richard Feynman said, let me be more tolerant of questions that cannot be answered than the answers which simply will not be allowed to be questioned. So we are nevertheless, all this angst that we have against them, whether it's the people of the pure fascination with pure mathematics being the answers to all reality, and the reality being something that cannot be understood. It is not known to those who think they know it. It is known to those who know they cannot know it. So we are evolving, we are gravitating slowly, gradually towards a consensus of the primacy of consciousness. And we also gravitating towards the non-computational, not pure mathematics, non-computational being part of the equation. And for that, I applaud. I applaud with all humbleness, the most fascinating 5 hours. Thank you, all of you. Thank you.
It's wonderful to hear you are so content with what you've heard. I know my own contribution could have only been a minor facet of this sparkling jewel, but I would say that my preoccupations in life have never been to find answers to the unanswered questions. I am much more concerned by the questions that nobody troubles yet to ask.
Can you mention a couple?
Yeah, not in public. Well, all of them to do with, how can I put it? With the things that people think they believe, but which they actually don't. For example, if you look online, you will find everywhere that 20% of our oxygen comes from the Amazon rainforest. No oxygen comes to us from the Amazon rainforest. And indeed, if every aspect, if every burnable substance on and in the surface of the earth were burned, it would reduce the amount of oxygen in the air from about 20.9% to about 20.75%. So you wouldn't even notice the difference. Everybody insists that we need to get away from plastic bags and get those nice bags made of hemp and sisal. Sisal has almost entirely destroyed the rainforests of Madagascar for its production. The production of sisal is enormously polluting. The amount of energy that it involves is vast. The transportation cost it involves is far greater than plastic bags. And the fact that plastic doesn't degrade into carbon dioxide and water vapor is, in fact, it's saving grace and not its problem. I could go on, but most of the things that we think we believe in the modern world are simply the very opposite of the truth. And you just mentioned just now, Chanda, you mentioned social media. And no one has really awakened to the fact that within the last couple of years, democracy and government has actually disappeared. It was typified by the election of President Trump. But in the past, people would get their news from newspapers. You would read the Times of India, and if it said it in the Times of India, then it was probably true. But now attitudes to things like vaccination against COVID-19 are not governed by the news media. The youngsters, anybody under 40, won't bother to read newspapers. They rarely watch the television news. They get all their information from social media. Now, editors in the past, whether they were good or bad, were experienced. You didn't get to be appointed an editor until you'd shown that you were a good and competent journalist. You might be right-wing or left-wing, which everybody understood, but nonetheless, you were somehow a person of authority, a person of wisdom, a person who had gone through a long selection procedure before you ever became an actual editor. Well, now, any fool, if they attract enough interest online, becomes better than an editor. The people who are running the opinions and the knowledge of the young are the influencers, and influencers can be bought at 10 a penny. I mean, people buy influencers and tell them what to say, and that now governs what children believe. A large proportion of Americans won't have the vaccine, not because of any scientific reason or not because of any objective understanding, but solely because of the drivel that is everywhere on social media. And in future, all of our knowledge and understanding is going to be gained by what's on social media, TikTok and Facebook, and not at all from what we have ever in the past understood as reputable news sources. You hear people online saying, well, if you believe something, make sure you research it properly. What 22-year-old has ever sat and researched something properly? He will read, if you have the vaccine, your penis will drop off, so he won't have the vaccine. He won't say, I wonder if it's true. And in fact, society, as we have known it, in the last couple of years, has finished. We're in a new era. It's never going to go back to normal, where the opinions of the young are all what they read on social media. It is the greatest retrospective revolution that we have ever seen, and nobody yet seems to have awoken to it. That's a question that others aren't asking, but which I quite like to ask myself.
And there is another aspect to it. I'm in complete agreement. There is another aspect that I think is even more subtle, maybe one of the questions we don't ask ourselves as well, which is that we have made refutations of bullshit banal, because there is a refutation for everything on social media. And those refutations often are not refutations at all. They are just as nonsensical as the thing that claims to have been refuted. So I admire your tolerance, Chandler, and the acceptance that you've expressed. I think that's a higher value. To a large extent, I'm jealous a little bit of that. It's not a place I've arrived at in my personal inner life. I'm still quite combative, and I think Western culture owes a lot to calling out bullshit for its historical development. That's what we have always done. Otherwise, Aristotle's biology would still be in vigor, and that was bullshit. He did a number of good things, but Aristotle bungled biology very, very severely. So I still feel the need to call out bullshit. The problem is that a legitimate calling out of bullshit now is drowned into a sea of nonsensical calling out of bullshit, like people saying that, you know, the idea that the earth is not flat is bullshit. And there are lengthy online refutations for the idea that the earth is a sphere or a spheroid. And so if you call out bullshit, you will just be one more of those, and people will just, you know, neglect what you're saying or disregard it because you're just one more of those hysterical voices on social media saying that, you know, this scientific research is nonsensical, just like so many others say that scientific research on vaccines is nonsensical. So how do you navigate this now? Society has become hysterical. We've lost our references of reliability. Willingly, we've ignored those. There is no more respect for authority. You know, sometimes authority is false. An argument from authority is one of the classical logical fallacies. But sometimes somebody who spent 10 years researching something that you just heard about yesterday may know more than you. You know, and how do you call that if not authority? Well, it is, right? If you neglect authority, you're lost, you are unmoored, you're adrift in the ocean. And that's where we are today. I don't know how to solve this. Sometimes if I let myself be sucked into this, it almost brings me to despair, but I'm as I age, I have developed an ability to sort of let go. You know, I do what I can, and I don't take responsibility for the end result. So if all goes to hell, too bad. I will know I will have done what I could.
I saw the other day, I was sent a wonderful meme to explain how social media works. And the person had written, I prefer apples to oranges. And the answer comes back from some anonymous person, but you haven't even mentioned mangoes or pineapples. You make me sick. Get yourself educated. I'm literally quaking with fear here. I'm trembling with fright at your bias. Now, that's just a joke, but it's exactly how social media work. And of course, dare I use the word, algorithms they wrote deliberately prioritize the argumentative and trouble-causing comments in order to get people excited and involved. The more times they come back and click, the better you're doing. So you don't want to do them good. If doing them harm gets you more clicks, then do them harm is what you do. But the overwhelming growth of social media and the loss, as you rightly say, the loss of respect for authority or even understanding that there might be objective news. Whole notion that science is simply subjective, and who knows? Perhaps we should give equal credit to the fact that the Earth might be a dome or a triangle.
May I say something?
Please.
Yeah, what I was trying to say was that this particular discussion is about artificial intelligence and natural intelligence. Now, talking about a lot of criticisms were also given to Aristotle and to others in this particular discussion. But when we talk about concepts and when we see how the results of our experiments and studies fit those concepts, then we find Aristotle has a lot of good contribution to make. For example, he given the concept of hylomorphism, that it is not possible to transform one form of species to another form. So he gives us concepts. And now in the fossil data also, a lot of these challenges are there. And then this concept of organic whole, like from one complete comes another complete. So we don't see any kind of reductionistic paradigm for living reality, whereas for life always displays organic concepts. Like you have an egg, you have a chicken, it cannot be reduced to more simpler components. Life always comes as a complete and much more complex than just a bundle of chemicals. Plus it is intelligent, it is having consciousness, it is having perceptions, and all those qualities which we don't find in artificial things. I would like to say that this concept of memory. When we say memory, memory is usually like when there is some input to some kind of machine and it records, and from that, if we can, that becomes a kind of a memory. But in the concept of recollection, which was given by I think Plato, he clearly said that when a teacher is teaching how to solve a problem to a student, he does not tell all the steps, he just gives hints, and the student can somehow solve the problem and he can understand it. So even though the student was not given the entire solution, but he was able to solve the problem. And this is an example of the statement that knowledge is much more fundamental, like the composition of the human or the personality is from knowledge, from truth, and from seeking satisfaction. That is the Vedic idea. So therefore, it seems that we need to focus on the realities of the objects that we want to study, rather than being dragged into some controversies just to make for the sake of it. We should accept what is coming out from those examples and how it fits different types of concepts, and we should accept those which are like the best concepts to which explains those observations. So what do you think about this?
Since Professor Ford didn't come, I'll try to speak around what you said. You brought many points up, so I'll just make some maybe incoherent commentary on a few of those points. I think what we call reductionism has gotten a bad press. In principle, to reduce something to another means only to explain one thing in terms of another. That's all it means. But it has come to mean, under the materialist or physicalist ethos, to reduce a whole to fundamentally separate interacting parts. But that's not really what reductionism in and of itself means. It's a particular form of reductionism to reduce a holistic system into interacting but fundamentally separate parts. I think that is wrong. I think fundamental wholes cannot be explained in terms of the behavior of its proper parts. There may not even be a thing such as a proper part. I think a science that is often co-opted and abused, but I will cite it nonetheless. Quantum mechanics has showed us that at a very fundamental level, entangled systems cannot be described in terms of the separate behavior of their parts. And there is very good reason to think that the universe is one entangled system. So I think that's wrong, but reductionism in and of itself to explain one thing in terms of another has been validated by 400 years of science. Another point that is often misunderstood is what science actually does. Science doesn't say anything directly about what things are. Science makes statements about how things behave, whatever they are, because that's what the scientific method equips us to do, to tell how nature behaves and to predict nature's behavior. Because experiments, that's the form of the answer that you get from an experiment. You ask nature a question, what will you do, Mrs. Nature, if I set up the following conditions? And then you run the experiment, you measure the result, and the result is what nature did in reply or as a reaction to your experimental conditions. So science tells us how nature behaves, and then you can infer what nature might or might not be based on the behavior, but that's an inferential step. That's a step of indirection. Science is about predicting nature's behavior. And the scientific stories about what nature is are convenient fictions. For instance, when Newton tried to explain gravity by talking of an invisible force that acts instantaneously between bodies and at a distance, that was a convenient fiction, because you could think of nature's behavior in terms of that force, that invisible force existing. Now, it took the French 50 years to stop laughing at Newton's mysticism about, invisible forces acting at a distance, but it was a convenient fiction that worked for practical purposes. It was operationally useful. In other words, nature behaved as though such an invisible force existed, and that's all you need to make good predictions and call your theories scientifically confirmed. Today, we have different convenient fictions. Today, we have a space-time fabric that can bend and twist, be stretched, be compressed. That's Einstein's convenient fiction. Or we have the convenient fiction of elementary subatomic particles. If you think we have ever seen a Higgs boson or even measured a Higgs boson directly, you don't know what was going on. The Higgs boson decays before it can ever interact with measurement equipment. What we measure are the footprints of the Higgs boson, the trash into which it decays. And we infer that there was such a thing as a Higgs boson. It's a convenient fiction. It helps us think about nature in those terms. But convenient fictions always change. They are always provisory. They are always tentative. They serve a purpose for a certain period of time. Then our knowledge evolves to a degree of sophistication in which those convenient fictions are no longer intuitive or they don't fit the data. So we look for different convenient fictions. So now we talk about hyperdimensional brains in M theory. We talk about time arising from microscopic quantum level processes in loop quantum gravity. We always have convenient fictions and they are useful. We need them. The problem is that we mix them with a statement about what nature actually is. And science has very little to say about what nature actually is. It only has something to say, and that's very important, it enables all of technology. It has something to say about nature behaves, and then convenient fictions are useful for us to think of nature in terms of those fictions. So we can sort of get some kind of cognitive closure, but they are
I
just
think that's a good
convenient
point.
fictions.
I think that's a good observation you are making. And that's why some of our, our masters used to say, what we need to incorporate in science is the culture of humility, that we should not say more than what we can say about science. So when we try to, for example, explain life in terms of just chemical interactions, it sort of becomes a non-humility, because we have not explained life as a result of chemical reactions. So if this scientific culture of humility comes in, then that will be, it seems, very good for the progress of the thought process of the scientist. Just as for any spiritual tradition, humility is the backbone or foundation. That I don't know, the idea of Socrates, who said that the only thing I know is I don't know anything. This type of conception, when will scientists be able to realize such humility?
Yeah, it's something that is known to hardcore scientists in the front lines and is not known by the self-appointed spokespeople of science. But when Fabiola Gianotti, who today is the Director General of CERN and was the Director General in 2012 when the Higgs boson discovery was announced, when there was a plenary meeting at CERN, and there was a lot of speculation that Fabiola would announce finally the discovery of the Higgs, but very few people knew for sure. The room was packed full, and Fabiola, for half an hour, she presented dozens of slides as an introduction to prepare the part of the talk in which she would end up revealing that we discovered, we've proven the Higgs boson, 1 chance to a million. But she built up that story slowly, and the whole room was anxious, like, get to the point, just tell us, do we have the statistics or do we not? When she finally got to the point where she would show the slide, she stopped speaking and she just flashed the slide. And the entire room erupted in applause. I mean, people like me who were working at this thing from the beginning of the Atlas project, at the beginning of the LHC project in 1994, for us, it was like the completion of what used to be our life's mission. So it was a great eruption of applause and screaming and cheering. Fabiola couldn't speak anymore. Now, what was that slide that she showed? It was a histogram, complete abstraction. And there was a bump in that histogram that should not have been there if the Higgs boson didn't exist. And we could exclude the possibility that that bump would be just because of stochastics or noise or just by chance, with a 3 sigma confidence, 1 in a million that could be attributed to chance. That's the Higgs boson, an anomalous bump in a histogram, a little line on a graph. So that's what I mean by, we forget that we are dealing with convenient fictions, explanatory models that help us get a grip on nature's behavior, but tell us surprisingly little, not nothing, but surprisingly little about what is actually happening, what nature actually is. And the scientists in front lines know that, but the rest of them and the scientists and the science spokespeople and the culture at large, they think we discovered the God particle, the abyss between reality and popular.
This is an interesting discussion. What happened in the life of many great scientists, when they express certain ideas, then the rest of the community became somewhat hostile, often many times. One example is in the life of Julian Schwinger, when he was talking about certain ideas like cold fusion and other things, and few more other types of experiments. Then what happened? A lot of people in the nuclear physics community called him crazy. Then he told, in one of his replies in letters, he told that when they told him if any nuclear physicist believes that, then he said, I am a nuclear physicist and I'm saying like this, then why you do like this to me? So he wrote few books, and in that he wrote that if they don't come to accept you, then you just beat them. So that was his mood after that. So I mean, many frontline scientists have been experiencing that type of and that is all happening because we are all having a particular point of views, and we think that point of view is like the complete truth. But when another person
I cannot hear him anymore. I don't know whether I'm the only one.
Sorry, there was some big sound here. So, so that scientist. So what happens? If we are talking from particular point of views according to our upbringing, lessons, cultural backgrounds, and whatever. But the holistic, the complete view may not be like what I have observed from my own angles of vision. So we must accept that we as human beings need some kind of help from a more conceptual concepts, because our concepts are not sufficient to deal with even I would say particles or waves that we study in quantum theory. We are not able to solve quantum gravity. So then lots of problems we have. Then why we claim that all of a sudden that we can explain consciousness in terms of quantum theory, or we can explain biology in terms of chemical concepts, so which since ages the philosophers have denied, and some of them are very important philosophers. So is it not that today again we have become like something like the sophists of the time of Socrates, that we are just arguing for the argument's sake and not for the truth's sake?
Professor Ford, do you want to comment on
it? Not on that, but I did want to comment on the question of reductionism. Dr. Kastrup is quite correct to advocate reductionism as an important tool within science. And I may say we were discussing, remember, things like social media, because they are the product of what they call AI and the algorithms on which artificial intelligence is predicated. But the problem with reductionism is that it has come to the fore. It is as though you have a sample of ink on paper. And the analogy I've used in the past is that you bring your microscope to bear on the sample of ink. And later you analyze it. And you pull out the analytical spectrum. You put it under an IR spectroscope and get the full details. Later you might even get it under the electron microscope and see the way in which the atoms fit together to form the molecules that comprise the ink. Well, what I do is the opposite. When I see that ink on the paper, I pull my view out, not in, because we are stuck with this reductionist imperative, and nobody looks at the bigger view. I come out rather than going in, and I suddenly realize that ink on the paper is actually a symphony by Beethoven. This is a printed score. So I settle back and listen to the music whilst everybody else is looking at the ink. And the problem is not that reductionism is good or bad, that reductionism is all. And that, from my point of view, is an overwhelming consideration. And we really need, for instance, people always want electron microscopes with higher and higher magnification. Most of my work is done with microscopes that magnify about 150 times. Because that's where you can see entire cells talking to each other and communicating and living their little lives. I'm not bothered about what's going on inside their mitochondria. I couldn't give a stuff for what's inside the DNA of their genes. I want to know what they are doing. You might as well think that you can study avian sociology by looking at a sliced chicken sandwich. You might just as well think that you are going to understand mammalian interaction by putting a piece of bacon under a magnifying glass. I want to see entire life going on, not little bits of it. And sadly, I seem to be one of the few people who adopts this sort of anti-reductionist point of view.
I agree entirely with that, unreservedly. I would just call it a particular form of reductionism, reducing wholes into smaller parts. That's one form, but you can reduce systems to bigger wholes. That's also a form of reduction in the sense that you explain a system in terms of something other than the system and of which the system may be a part. But the reductionist, the kind of reductionism you're describing, I agree entirely. It's nonsensical. It's like trying to explain Cologne's cathedral by drawing histograms of how many bricks of which type compose it. You leave out Cologne's cathedral if you do that, because Cologne's cathedral is precisely about how those bricks come together, the harmony of the composition, the architectural composition, and the atmosphere that is created when you bring those bricks together in a certain way. So we need to reawaken our sensitivity for what wholes tell us about nature. Another thing, a very common assumption in modern science, which is utterly unjustified and in fact contradicted by science itself, is the notion that all salient laws of nature are already at work at the microscopic level. In other words, that all laws of nature ultimately are the laws of microscopic quantum systems. That's an enormous assumption. There can be organizational principles, fundamental organizational principles in nature that only kick in in larger systems, that only kick in at certain levels of complexity, so to say. But we assume for some reason that cannot be true, that all the salient laws of nature are the laws that apply to fundamental subatomic particles. This is an entirely arbitrary assumption because we have never run an experiment that could prove this, or at least indicate this, since making experiments with larger complex systems is rather impossible, since you can't control their conditions fully. You know, they don't fit into a laboratory. So there could be organizational principles in nature that only kick in at the level of organisms, at the level of societies, at the level of galaxies, and which are irreducible, in other words, not explainable in terms of microscopic quantum regularities. But we assume that everything that exists can be reduced to these regularities that apply at the elementary microscopic level. This is fully arbitrary. Maybe nature is so, maybe, but there is no good reason to declare that it is so at this point.
It's one of those unasked questions.
There you go.
Yeah, one more thing I would like to add here. See, one of the most important ingredient of nature is the process. Kind of thinking is going on, and that thought is producing those concepts of atoms and molecules. So simplest reality has been neglected. So some impenetrable, but in the idea of some other philosophers like Hegel, the thought can overcome those kinds of ideas.
Prabhu?
Yes, I'm afraid we lost the sound there.
Recording stopped. Is Shanta Maharaj there? I don't have permission to record. It's going live on YouTube. It will be all right. Let me do a screen recording.
Oh, unless you run over a time limit, I don't know. I would like to say one thing, if I may. I'm feeling rather the worse for wear now, so if you will forgive me all, I will bow out and leave the discussion to you. I want to thank you all for triggering some lively ideas, and I only hope that my rather feeble insights can fit well enough into your wiser minds. So I shall leave my thoughts with you, not my body or my brain just at the moment, and I hope you will understand why I'm asking for leave of absence. It's not for lack of enthusiasm or lack of support. It's been a great honor to be invited to take part, and I have enormously enjoyed what's been said, and rather nicely have learnt quite a lot more than I expected to, and I expected to learn quite a lot.
Professor Ford, it's been a very sincere honor for me to be in an event with you. I hadn't expected that this would happen in my life. I'm very happy.
Well, it's been good to make your acquaintance.
I just dropped from the call earlier. So my
Shanta
point was
Maharaj is back. He can start recording. Okay, you're okay.
So my point was only this thing.
I think Professor Ford and I think we need to leave. I'm supposed to be in another call already for 1 minute.
Sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir, for your inputs, and I'm very thankful to both of you.
Thank you very much for having me and for having us.
Thank you.
All right, gentlemen. Thanks a lot. See you soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Excellent afternoon. Thank you so much. I hope you will be here tomorrow.
No, not tomorrow. No,
Oh.
but I'll be here in time. At some point, I'll come back.
Oh, excellent. There are so many things I wish to talk to you about as well. And here's a quick one for you, okay?
I don't know what you mean.
Analog, digital.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So you can analyze on a sine wave. You can see a sine wave, and there's a digital representation, yeah? Whereas, there's a sinodal wave, yeah, analog. You can you put a couple of volts AC to a transistor, you get the semiconductor conducting, yeah. Digital, give me a break. Impossible.
Right. We explore this in the next opportunity. Thank
Please.
you, everybody. Have a good end of the evening for you, or the day, wherever you are. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Maharaj, may we hear from you some concluding words?
Yes. I think in a very different way than which the others were speaking. So I didn't want to interrupt really and confuse anyone. The topic of the panel discussion was the what was that? How to explain what is beyond the mechanical description of life? Is that the correct topic?
Yes, Maharaj. Yes.
How to explain life beyond the mechanical conception. So that was the topic supposed to be the topic of discussion. We got into many other things, which are also very interesting. But I would like to address that topic specifically. If I don't want to take everyone's time now because it's almost the end of the conference. And I consider the most fundamental and most central topic to be what philosophers have established since the time of Aristotle, actually, and also in Vedic times. And that is the concept of purpose. Aristotle called it final cause. And he attributed there were four aspects of force or explanation, one of which was the final cause or the actual purpose of a thing. We speak of existence, but existence has a purpose, which is not generally discussed or explained by science. So what is the purpose? We know if we say everything exists, what is the purpose for that existence? Why do they exist? What is it? What are they doing? Now, Aristotle said that was a very important part of understanding what things are, or what existence is, or what reality is. Without understanding that dimension, then we don't really or properly understand things. And in that book that we published, the Idols of the Mind, this was a central point, that the blind men, when they are touching the elephant without knowing what it was, were not able to properly define the various parts that they touched, the various parts of the whole. So without understanding the whole, the parts actually can't make any sense whatsoever. And that an analyzation method, the method of analyzing things, does take the parts as separate identities, independent of the whole. It doesn't concern itself with the whole, but only with the individual parts. That's what reductionism does. And mechanism means that it only regards the things of reality or the world as interacting with each other in an immediate way and in an arbitrary way. In other words, as happenings, mere happenings. Doesn't explain the necessity any necessity between the happenings of the various interactions and actions of the things of the world. It doesn't concern itself with that, except in terms of laws, which are formalizations of what happens after the fact. Now, law means necessity. So there is necessity in the scientific worldview in terms of what we call laws, but those laws are posited, no, we might say de facto, without explaining exactly how they come from, but only in terms of what correlates with the data. For instance, when a star moves from here to here to here to here to here every night, we trace out the arc that the movement of the stars produces, and we attach a curve to that, which we calculate mathematically, or we explain mathematically, and that's it. That is our law, the law of motion. However, that doesn't explain motion. It doesn't explain why the stars move that way. So this kind of formalistic necessity is not real necessity, actual necessity. And yeah, I don't want to get too confusing. It is a very deep subject. But the point is that if we want to be truly philosophical in our understanding of things, we have to take what the philosophers have already established as essential points of consideration. And this idea of purpose or final end, or whatever you want to call it, is a central topic of philosophy since the time of Aristotle. And in a very important study that Immanuel Kant made so many thousands of years later, a couple of thousand years later, is that the feature that distinguishes life from matter is called Naturzweck. They call it Naturzweck, which means a purpose, a natural purpose. That life has as its fundamental principle purposefulness. Now, that is also called in philosophy teleology, that there is an end that things tend toward. And it's not merely a mechanical end, but it's an end that's contained in potential at the beginning. The whole potential for what is to come is already contained in the beginning. And then it manifests itself in the end. Now, science deals with cause effect instead of purpose. They call it cause effect. That something causes something else, and they try to explain things in that way. But it's not merely a cause effect mechanical kind of relationship. It's more a rational type of cause. Rational cause means a logical necessity is involved. Reason means rational necessity. You can say what caused this, or why this happened because, you can say. But that because doesn't only mean cause effect. That because means why. What reason? So reason and cause are related. In the mechanical conception of reason, we call it cause. But in the logical, conceptual, philosophical sense, cause is actually the reason or rationality. And what Vedanta has also explained is that reality is not only some material, irrational substance that is happening from time to time in different configurations, but that the reality is rational. This is the foundation of science. The reality is itself rational. The rational means the real, and the real means the rational. Now, if that's the case, and this the Greeks understood also, Anaxagoras said that reason rules the world, or nous rules the world. That if the case is that actuality is actually rational, and reality is rational, and the rational is real, then we are living within a rational substance. And we can call that God. And everything has a purpose within that rational or reason. And it's explained in the Vedas what that is. That we are servants of God. That we have as our purpose for existence to please God, to be happy, blissful, ecstatic, and full of knowledge, and eternal in that existence. And it's not merely something to be analyzed and understood and utilized for other purposes. But ultimately, everything is purposeful. And this purpose, the scientists that came and the philosophers that came, they were talking about intelligence, how difficult it is to understand what that intelligence is. But if we recognize that everything has a purpose, that means it has a potential and it has a fulfillment, it has an end, an aim, then we can recognize that there is some kind of directed movement. We can call it intelligence, but it's actually something more fundamental than that. It's something we can call reason. There is reason in everything. And that's why it appears to be intelligent to us. The intelligence is merely a superficial way of seeing what is in actuality the reason inherent in things. And the reason inherent in things is that because the reality of which those things are part is also rational. And therefore, Vedas speak of Krishna, a rational, personal being. Personal being means a rational person who can think, has reason, feeling, so many other things. So these are all tied together, and without that theistic view, it's very difficult to understand what is the reality of which we are part when we can't connect that reality with reason, with personality. It will be impossible to understand. According to Veda, this is the fact. So these points, I think, were not addressed. And although what they had to say is also very interesting, we all contributed to, that was also very much appreciated. But my focus is more on purpose. What is purpose and how purpose rules the whole conception of reality, of science, of religion, everything. And that life is fundamentally purposeful, as Kant had concluded, and Hegel and other philosophers have agreed. And like I said, this is something that we find all the way back to Aristotle and before that in the Vedic culture. Sarva karana karanam. There is something that is causing cause. And that is God, that is Krishna. And that is called reason. Anyhow, there's a deep topic, a broad topic. I didn't want to get into all of that because I think that would have passed what everyone wanted to say. And we wanted everyone to have something and a chance with this conference to express their views, express their thoughts and their feelings, and to discuss them with one another. My humble obeisances to you all.